Hey, everybody. If you're listening to this, you are listening to the first free hour of this episode of The Shift with Doug McKenty. If you like what you're hearing, please consider subscribing to the show in order to access the full feature-length versions of the podcast, as well as have access to the members forum, where we discuss potential topics and interviews and dive deep into the overall concept of The Shift. For only $6 a month, not only do you get the full-length episodes, but also an opportunity to co-create with me, your host, Doug McKenty, the future of the show. Go to www.theshiftnow.com or patreon.com/theshift and sign up today in order to help make the shift possible. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. Good morning, noon, or night, wherever and whenever you are listening to The Shift. I'm your host. My name is Doug McKenty. This episode was recorded on January 19th, 2022, and features education activist and host of the Social Impact podcast, Lynn Davenport. Lynn has been involved in the battle to decentralize public education for many years, at one point running for the local school board in her community outside of Dallas, Texas. She has consistently resisted the imposition of educational curriculums originating at the national level and advocates against an emphasis on teaching to a standardized testing regime. From her perspective, such standardization has resulted in the teaching of facts at the expense of critical thinking techniques that have historically defined the characteristics of an educated person. Lynn's work seeks to empower communities with the ability to construct individuated curriculums and implement alternative educational practices that reflect the diversity of local community and culture. Through this empowerment process, parents can have a stronger voice concerning what their children learn in school. Over the decades, through federal funding and other mechanisms, public education has become so centralized that local school boards are little more than bureaucrats required to implement a system dictated from above. The ability for parents to engage in meaningful dialogue concerning their child's education, with the ability to result in substantive change, has been reduced to next to nothing as local school boards have little power over these decisions. The end result has been the complete control by a handful of people within federal institutions to influence how the next generation views the world. This also allows for the insertion of political and social constructs that conflict with many community and family values. Lynn sees this as an attack on the sanctity of the family unit itself and dedicates her work to reestablishing the connection between education and a parent's right to choose the worldview they wish to share with the next generation. In recent years, the battle has expanded to include an emphasis on social-emotional learning that alters not only how students think, but how they feel as well. With the introduction of modern blockchain technologies and artificial intelligence, the public education system is now capable of analyzing mountains of data compiled to influence each individual student on the psychological level. This level of social engineering, potentially eliminating local and parental influence, has never before been attempted. Lynn's work seeks to educate parents about this impending new system of education already well on its way to implementation before it's too late. Find out more on Twitter at Lynn S. Davenport. For more information about The Shift, to sign up for the newsletter, subscribe for feature-length episodes of the show, go to www.theshiftnow.com. You can also access the podcast and discover more about my personal perspective by following the Populist Papers blog on Substack. Join the conversation on the Doug McKenty Facebook page. I'm at DMcKenty on Twitter, or find all my work posted on Rockfin, Odyssey, and any of your favorite podcast hosting sites. I want to thank Lynn Davenport for agreeing to this interview, and thank you for helping to make the shift. Hey, everybody, and welcome to this 105th episode of The Shift. I'm your host, Doug McKenty. I'm joined today by Lynn Davenport. She's been an activist in the school scene, in the education scene in Dallas, Texas, for some years now. And of course, as the COVID situation has rolled on through, that's become even more of a priority. So I'm looking forward to having a conversation, not just about education in general, but about how COVID and the lockdowns and all of this is starting to affect even more the situation that she was dealing with prior to COVID. So, Lynn, if you want to just introduce yourself to my audience and give people a little bit of your history in terms of your activism with your local public school district.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Doug.
Absolutely.
Yes. So I'm a parent of public school kids. Two now are in college. One is still in high school, senior year. So I'm on the home stretch, and I started getting engaged in what they were learning, how they were learning, who was profiting off of that. I saw a really a serious issue with standardized testing and narrowing the curriculum and making it all about what's tested is really all that gets taught. And so that sent me down all the rabbit holes and understanding the bills behind it, coming down from the federal level, No Child Left Behind, Every Student Succeeds Act, even going back to the 60s, 1965 Elementary, Secondary, and Secondary Education Act. So fast forward, I uh, I I started researching what was happening with data mining and a lot of the contracts that were given to these companies through our school districts. But as far as my background, I worked for Arthur Andersen. I was an IT recruiter and worked in their business consulting department before the whole implosion with Enron. You know,
Right.
that big mess, and quit to stay home with my kids. And here I am. I run a podcast called Social Impact that exposes the impact investing market and a lot of things that happen at the local level with our schools. And then for 11 years, I've served as a coach for job seekers, unemployed people.
Hmm.
And I just quit doing that in the fall. And now I'm focusing 100% on education and what's happening in the schools.
Great. And you ran for the local school board, right? A few years back?
I did. In 2017, I ran for a seat on the Richardson ISD Board of Trustees, and I lost. I went up against an incumbent who works for a Gates-funded public-private partnership, and so I wanted to get her off of the board, and so I got about 46% of the votes. It was a tight race. But it ended up being a good thing, I think, in the long run. That I'm a free agent. I'm able to move to really go where I want to go and talk about what I want to talk about. And the
Right.
school board, it's kind of a lost cause at this point. I don't know how one person really can turn the tide on a board of 7-0 lockstep voting. Is what we see.
I just did an interview with Renette Senum, who is running for California governor now, but she was the mayor of Nevada City, and she tried to stand up against the lockdowns and what Gavin Newsom was trying to do. From her information, there was a different and better path forward, and she actually ended up resigning from the city council there because she ran into the same thing. So I think what I'd love to get into with you is just how challenging it really is to affect policies, be it like the broader city council policy that Renette was dealing with, or specifically in your area of education on the local level. Like, it seems like so much is dictated from either the state or especially the federal level, that how much power do these local school boards even actually have?
Well, it's funny you say that because our district, I've complained for years that they don't exercise local control, because if everything trickles down from the federal level and the state level, and you have the Department of Education, and then you have these really they're a lot of them are unfunded mandates and bills that well, like in Texas, the legislature had 7,000 bills. This was a few sessions back. More than half of them were education bills, which told me our schools are a huge target.
Mhm.
But when it comes to the mask mandates, they all of a sudden, my superintendent was saying, well, we really want to. We need to make local decisions. So we want to exercise local control. That's the first time I had ever heard her say, oh, we're going to make decisions locally. Everything they do is cut and pasted either from bills or even policies that the school board will adopt and vote in favor of. Those all look exactly the same. They mirror all of the other districts in the state. So they don't really make local decisions. They don't really want to. And I've been advocating for local decisions, local responsibility, and really taking ownership so that we make better decisions, because they are, it should be those closest to the kids.
Right.
They don't want that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the biggest issue that we're facing today. Not, again, just not in terms of education, but it's such a huge part of everybody's life, of course. But
Mhm.
in general, is the lack of local control and almost complete inability from people like you and I to affect, or real change in these institutions that are directed above. I think if you could comment on that, and then we could kind of get into the curriculum thing, because this is what standardized testing does, right? It actually impacts the curriculum of every school in the country, and it forces everybody across the country to learn the same thing, and all the teachers teach the same thing. So parents and local school districts and teachers have zero ability to determine exactly what their children and what their students are going to learn.
Yeah, I think especially I see this mostly in these affluent areas because my kids were put in a Title I school, but then it kind of flipped the demographics and we started seeing a lot of tear downs and mansions going up, and so the
Hmm.
demographics changed. But people think that if it's affluent, that the teachers write their own curriculum, that it's all homegrown. It's some sort of they don't know what they don't know, but the push for a standardized education is really happening nationwide. Texas supposedly said no to the Common Core, which was supposed to roll out across all 50 states the Common Core state standards so that there would be alignment. If a child moved from one state to the other, that they would be in the same at the same point. That wasn't really the agenda behind Common Core, but that's how it was pitched. Well, Texas did say yes to the career and college ready standards, which was Common Core aligned. So
Hmm.
it's all just deceptive semantics. But this idea that we would have this standardized education, everything would look the same in every state, and then this is a global issue. So we're seeing this. I've been watching the OECD, which is something I can't remember what it stands for, but Andreas Schleicher came to Texas and was presenting, talking about what education looks like across the globe. And you'll see they would assess what's going on in Singapore and all of these places that they would hold to these really they would put Singapore and some of these, and even China, on a pedestal. But if you look at how they're learning, it's very standardized. And I think that America has been known for the free enterprise, and we've got this. You can go. All 50 states are different, and you can get a different. You've got different cultures, and it's like, who wants a homogenous world where
Well,
everybody's learning the same thing, whether it's in Singapore or in Salt Lake City?
exactly. Yeah.
We don't want that.
It's always surprised me that the people that push the strongest for diversity tend to then be attracted to these very top-down educational curriculums, um, or medical services or healthcare services, and all of this, which are
Mhm.
amazingly homogenizing. I mean, it's like, if you want to have a diverse community, you've got to allow communities to make these choices for themselves. It just fascinates me that because
Yeah.
I feel like um, those who are typically labeled as conservative, if you want to use that paradigm, get labeled as not believing in diversity. But the only way to create a diverse situation is to decentralize power and allow communities and allow families to have input and make choices about what their kids are going to learn or what healthcare they're going to use.
Yeah. And I think that because of that desire for decentralization, then what we're seeing is they're inserting blockchain, a big push for blockchain. And I don't know if you want to go into that, but putting the kids and their whole, what they call lifelong learning, they want to put their whole schooling experience on blockchain so that all of their records would be on, it's like stored, basically blocks of data stored
Hmm.
on these digital wallets. And so it's pitched as decentralization, but really what it does is it actually centralizes everything onto, for now, it'll be, an iPhone or a device. But it's pitched as being this convenient thing where you can get your transcripts and you'll have all your medical history on there, your mental health history, your vaccine passports, And even yesterday, I just saw that the same company that's doing this in Dallas, it's called Greenlight Credentials, is now working on doing it for physical fitness, like, the physical fitness test you took as a child in PE. And that would kind of tell you where you were and how many sit-ups you can do and your endurance and all of that. Now that's going to be put on blockchain. And so it's this huge pilot thing that's happening in Dallas ISD through the education service centers, which is through the state. It's kind of how they roll out some of the technologies and training and professional development. And then the Dallas Community College District. This all goes up to the Texas Education Agency. So I'm watching that very closely because I do believe that the push for mandatory masks, and then we'll see the mandatory vaccines in order to be enrolled in school, and then we'll have vaccine passports to prove it. And so the way that they will bring this, the blockchain is the technology of choice for vaccine passports. And so I'm following this Greenlight Credentials because they're using IBM, Hyperledger, Fabric. It's the technology used for blockchain. And I'll just make one side note is that during the Holocaust, Hitler partnered with IBM, their Hollerith machines. That was how they tracked, and they used those punch cards. That's how they tracked people. So think about that in terms of, okay, so now we're using IBM blockchain technology. To me, I can see a real parallel there because it's the perfect tool to be able to control how you do everything, whether it's seek medical care, go to public school, whether you'll be allowed to shop in this store or that store. And so being able to, they'll mandate, you'll have to show your vaccine status.
Well, that's what, right. I mean, it's so fascinating to watch. I mean, we've heard in Klaus Schwab's book from the World Economic Forum that the coronavirus was going to be used as an opportunity, quote unquote, to usher in this fourth industrial revolution, which includes all of this blockchain use and this data collection and all of the rest of it. And so it's so wild, that someone like yourself who's interested in the education field, you can see it coming. I think a lot of people, are only seeing, oh, well, it's neat. It's convenient that I can have this tool that keeps track of my vaccination status. But
yeah, one-stop shop. It's like you got it all right here. Like, here's my info.
It's very clear.
They'll say I own my own data. It's pitched as you will own your own data. Right. But that's not how it is. And this is a for-profit deal. It's also a captive market. So that's why they're targeting the schools, because think about the low-hanging fruit there. And Texas we have 5-point-something million children in Texas. And we also have floods of immigration. So we get about 80,000 new students a year. And that's just another opportunity to put the children, they call it womb to tomb, career or cradle to career, or you'll hear pre-K to gray is the new blockchain term, because they really truly want to access the children in utero all the way through, and they will be on blockchain. So the schools are a huge focus, and and how this whole nexus of these players have come together. I just I'm not clairvoyant or anything, but I've been able to study the patterns, the players, and figure out, okay, this is where they're going with this. I didn't see it years ago, but I did see the who. I just didn't understand the why.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it is fascinating because once you look into this, you can really see that they've been working on this for such a long time, and you can see the direction that it's going in. And that's why when it's portrayed as, this is just going to be your vaccine passport, it's actually also going to be used to track and trace all of your education, where you've been, and then where you're working. And I mean, basically everything about our lives. So it's not just a healthcare issue at all. Like, this is literally the imposition of this huge new system that's going to be definitive of the fourth industrial revolution. So getting this perspective from the education point of view, hopefully my listeners can take away that this is not going to be just medical. This is going to be about everything, the Internet of Things, even the Internet of Bodies that we've been hearing about. So
it's true.
I do want to get into, before we really get into the meat of all of that, where all of this stuff comes from, because you mentioned the public-private partnerships. And also that term captive market. I think that so much of this has to do with exactly that. I mean, people they want to talk about the profitability of all of this. And I think, and that's where it comes in for me with this difference between, decentralizing and having the Main Street economy be profitable. This is very different than the kind of profitability that we're seeing in the creation of these captive markets, like you're talking about, that are basically state imposed, but then just a few corporations that are going to profit wildly off of this fixed market that they've captured through government control.
Well, and I'll give you an example of it. There's this woman who works for iStation, which is a reading response to intervention software. It's like a reading software that they got the big fat contracts after No Child Left Behind passed. Well, that's a perfect example of the free market, which of course I'm a proponent of. But the free market so what happens is the elected bodies do not serve as the checks and balances. So the free market can just move on in. So that bill basically set up a marketplace. No Child Left Behind, Bush and Kennedy. Bush got it through. They picked a Dallas ISD trustee at the time, a lawyer, who they wanted to be kind of the architect, Sandy Kress. Sandy Kress goes on to make millions working for the testing companies that would benefit, or he worked for Pearson as a lobbyist. So this bill set up the marketplace for multiple. There's layers and layers of opportunity for the free market. But that iStation company was kind of a stealthy reading company or reading software company. Emerges on the scene. We get a pilot in Dallas ISD, Richardson ISD, where my kids are, Terrell, Houston ISD. All of those districts piloted it. So the bill passed, it was signed 2002. They piloted in 2003. Suddenly, fast forward all these years, our reading scores are, it's atrocious. More than half our kids in my district don't read on grade level. Mm-hmm. And I think you can tie it directly to this increase in education technology, and we're spending more money per pupil per year, year over year. And we just see a steady decline. And this was happening before the pandemic. So now they'll use the pandemic. Oh, well, the learning loss, the trauma and the kids being sheltered at home. And, we weren't able to access all these kids. But really, that learning loss was happening long before we had a pandemic. Yeah. So I call both, I tell them no. Let's go back, skip those 2 years. They're basically, you can't really track the testing because we didn't even have everybody accounted for. So go back before that and you can see, and I believe there's a direct correlation with the technology.
Right. Yeah, I did an interview with educator John Taylor Gatto years ago, and he was frustrated. He did the analysis by testing. He could tell by when people were drafted into the Army, they had to take a test, and he mm-hmm. figured out vocabulary levels, and basically from World War I to World War II, he saw the drop, and then from World War II to Vietnam, he could see the drop. And so this dumbing down process has been going on for a long time, mm-hmm. which is interesting because you can see that this. And I think the history that goes back, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation has been engaging in these public-private partnerships for 100 plus years now, and it's not working. It hasn't been working, and now they're taking it to this whole new level.
No, and I'm familiar with all of those, and people will say, who's they? Because we're talking about they. Well, right. There are all kinds of theys out there, but it is an elite ruling class that imposes a lot of these things on us, and they push these things through too, not just through public-private partnerships, but the chambers of commerce, and they go to the yes men and the leaders of the communities, and they'll get buy-in, and then they're able to push these agendas through. And we're talking, 100 years of dumbing down, and really the 60s was a huge turning point. Mm-hmm. in education. And it is a deliberate dumbing down. And you may have heard of Charlotte Iserbyt, or mm-hmm. Iserbyt, how do you say it? But she wrote a book on that. And she went to gosh, I forget where she went, somewhere traveling abroad with her husband, came back and was mortified at the changes that she was seeing in Maine, where she was. And she also worked for the Department of Education and saw these initiatives that were really, I mean, they weren't hiding it. They were trying to create change agents. And I see
Right.
that even to this day, Teach for America and all of these organizations trying to bring in change agents into the schools. And so much of this has nothing to do. I mean, they use all the buzzwords, like diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I always push back on that, and I say, okay, well then, how's it working for our Black and brown kids that you are supposedly so concerned about?
Right.
And they'll usually get some, some. They'll have the face or the poster child of the movement, and they'll hire somebody, give them a 6-figure salary, and they'll be the DEI or EDI director, diversity, equity, diversity, inclusion, whatever, and then you'll see no changes in student their reading abilities and academic performance. And so they're just empty platitudes. And so I call them out on that. And then, of course, as a white suburban mom, I'm really not in the suburbs, but that's just what I get labeled as. And I, so you must be racist if you don't subscribe to diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. But I would argue that they are the ones who are. It's so racist, and it's criminal to see how they spend all this money and it doesn't do a darn bit of good for these kids. I get very defensive
Right.
about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating. And one of the things that I caught, because I listened to the podcast episode that you did on the Social Impact podcast about the bullying that's been going on, one particular family that you focused on in the schools in terms of forcing the kids to wear the masks and the lengths that these people will go. And you mentioned that this concept of projection onto the family that just really doesn't want their kids to wear a mask in school, or is questioning the authority of the school district to kind of impose these mandates on children. And then you get into this huge fight, and the pro-maskers are projecting all of this hate or vitriol upon these poor people. And I find the same thing within this whole conversation about race and equity in education. Like I actually have no problems with parents or community deciding that they want to teach their kids whatever kind of history they want to teach, or whatever foundation. Like I'm open-minded to all kinds of alternatives, and so it's fascinating.
I see the void with African American studies. Like, bring it on,
right?
Bring it. Like, I see the history. We don't have the full picture, and like add it to it, sure, right. But there's something else going on. We're talking about connecting cultures and these made up curriculum these programs which line pockets, and all it does is breed hatred and division. It actually doesn't do what should be done organically. And
right,
so they
right.
call it something different it's not critical race theory, because they can, and that's another form of deceptive semantics. They'll say, we're not teaching critical race theory in Richardson ISD, and that's true. But they use CRT-like language. There is an agenda, and they bring in a curriculum where we're not even allowed to see it. We have to have security guards, armed security guards, to go in and see the curriculum that our kids are learning. And these lessons that are, they are so, you would be shocked at what they say. And I think, well, how are we progressing at all? It seems like we're going backwards.
Right.
We're not making any progress. Those are things that parents woke up to under the lockdowns and having their kids at home. They woke up and they could hear what they were doing on Zoom lessons, and that engaged, a whole nation of parents. And really, we talk a lot about the parent party. That's the new party. It's not left or right. They're saying, what are you teaching our kids? Where did this come from? How is this good for children? How is this going to unite us as a country? It's not. It's very divisive, right, and lucrative for those that put it forward. And a lot of it comes through social emotional learning. So I don't focus on CRT. I focus on SEL, which is social emotional learning, because that's setting the schools there. They're collecting all that behavioral data, and they're changing the mindset mindset of the children, their worldview, their attitudes, behaviors, beliefs, and then it's setting up for these social impact, these global social impact markets, and it feeds AI and it feeds I mean, it's all going to be fed into this whole system of blockchain. It's all about behavior change.
Right. Well, I think that's just exactly what we're talking about. I mean, you mentioned like an organic evolution, and that's how cultures and families and communities need to evolve in this organic way.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, what we're seeing is this standardization of all learning so that everybody's learning the same thing. And then this imposition, and maybe you could go a little bit deeper into the concept of social emotional learning, because what I'm
Mm-hmm.
seeing more and more is that instead of the organic growth that happens at the family and community level, is this standardization of practice across all of the education system. And then, like you're talking about, like they're literally, I mean, it's a form of indoctrination, right? It's not really education, it's indoctrination.
Correct. And it is indoctrination. And if it seeks to change the child's worldview and it seeks to change their attitudes, their values, their behaviors, their beliefs, all of those things. And then you feed it into these are measured, they're measuring their behavior changes. All of this can be scored, they can be nudged. They use software to do it in many cases. They have invasive surveys that they'll give the kids, questionnaires. I mean, my son, it was kind of funny. This was a few years ago. I think it was Naviance, which is college for your college transcripts. But they were asking him where his faith, and he took it literally. And he said Church of Christ because he knew we worship Christ in the churches. We're not Church of Christ, but it's just funny. I was like, I said, first of all, we're not Church of Christ. And second of all, you are not allowed to fill out any of those stupid surveys. It's none of their business. And he's
Right.
like, okay, but they pressure you. And well, say no and have them call me. I can't tell you how many times they have, the burden and the onus seems to be on the parent to have to catch it after the fact. And they just do it because nobody's really holding them to this. So there's all kinds of data, but the SEL, the social emotional learning, I think is that's something that I've been doing Google alerts for a couple of years now, and I've been seeing it for probably I'd say maybe 6 or so years. I've been really focused on it, and my friend Alice Linehan is the one that clued me in that it was happening. She's a Texas parent, mom who's an education activist and researcher. And so, I started seeing it and I would talk about this all the time and people just weren't ready for it. But now they're ready for it. Now they understand that this is a true, it's a complete takeover of the schools. It is indoctrination. And it really takes, now that they're weaving it in and embedding it in all subjects, it's really difficult to opt out of it because through the education technology and through the devices, you have no one standing in between that kid and that device. Right. And the teachers don't even have access sometimes to what the kids are seeing. And think about this too, that they can be computer adaptive assessments like this MAPS. It's from a vendor called NWEA. I think this is probably going to be the thing that will replace the big bad test at the end of the year, the bad STAR test, the standardized test.
Right.
Some legislator will pitch this as a solution. Everybody will be cheering, oh, he's such a hero. He got rid of that big bad standardized test. But the computer adaptive assessments will be far worse because they'll be all year long. They won't be the big thing at the end of the year. This will be ongoing, and you'll have it, and it can put a kid in a double bind where you're forced to, like my friend Alice, her daughter was forced to question her faith because it was saying, well, if there's a loving God, why would you have hurricanes and tornadoes and floods? Backs the kid in a corner, so they have to answer, well, there must not be. Right. It was like a philosophy question, really, in an English class.
Right.
So you'll see that kind of thing. We really won't be able to stand between a kid and the device. And you're seeing a lot of inappropriate relationships with teachers and students. That's increasing. And I think that is because the parent really is kind of pushed aside. You can access your teacher at midnight if you wanted to. Oh, I have a question. You can email your teacher, and then that can start up all kinds of inappropriate relationships. We're seeing that spike. I don't know, the increase, but it's significant. They're keeping track of that. Some organizations are following that. How many teachers have inappropriate, men and women have inappropriate relationships with kids because they can access them through apps and devices after hours?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's what I think is most concerning to me, is how much all of this is inserting itself in between the child parent relationship. And parents are really
Hmm.
asked essentially to have zero responsibility for their kids' education, which really includes their entire worldview. So to me, that's the point of parenting. I mean, that's what we're doing, is we're
Yeah.
helping our kids, and we're educating them from our perspective, from our worldview, and that's creating our cohesive family unit. And to
Well, that's
insert,
what they want, the wedge in the family. They want the wedge between the kid and the
right,
family, because then you can, if you can have them earlier in the morning, keep them later at night, you feed them all three meals. What do you need the family for? Really, it's just a place to sleep. We even see an increase in public boarding schools. I know we've got this. It's
wow,
not technically public in Dallas, but it's using public funds. For the first time, the city council gave this nonprofit $400,000 or so towards a boys' home, and it's basically, you know, and I understand the argument is always, well, there are kids who don't have families, there are kids who don't have parents who care, there are kids who are hungry. Of course, you would want to have a some sort of continuum of care, a way to refer. We've had that for a long time now, and I would also argue that teachers have been providing social emotional support and learning for children since the beginning of time. That's
mhm,
just that comes innately, that for most teachers, that is something that they do organically. So when you put in a more standardized model, then you've got it will eventually be on the test. So not only will you see the academic questions, you'll see the behavioral, you'll see the non-cognitive, you'll see the affective domain. They want to tap into that. If it's put into the TEKS, which is the Texas standards, it will be on the test. And so I try and remind people, these are conservative legislators that usually bring in all this junk, because they think, oh, well, kids aren't, they're not getting their values at home, and they're not learning how to behave at home. So we need to teach character traits in the schools. And if we
mhm,
mandate it, so we don't mandate it, the teachers won't teach it. And so then you've got this whole tail wagging the dog thing. And then you've got all this embedded in the standards, which means they're going to be forced to teach it, which means they're going to be testing it. And in Every Student Succeeds Act, there is, I believe, it's a fifth indicator that will be the non-cognitive. It will be tying to the social emotional. All of that will be measured with their academics. Oh, and the schools will be. I followed this too. That the schools are now, in my district, is a classic case of this, where the superintendent wants to be the hero, the mask, all this junk related to COVID. She's
mhm,
all focused on the medical stuff. She's cozy with the commissioner, or the commissioner's court, and the county judge, and the Health and Human Services Department. They're making decisions, not our school board, not the parents, but they're making arbitrary decisions for the school district, because really what they're making the schools, they're turning the schools into community medical centers. They no longer prioritize academics. You're going to get your health, your shots there, your vaccines, your well visits, your feminine products, your food, any mental health services. All of that is going to be in these community hubs, which
right,
were
even
formerly the schools.
even
And
birth control,
birth control, you got it. So all the
yeah,
sex ed stuff, there's been this whole decades of grooming. And I just watched a documentary last week. It was called Mind Polluters, and I was blown away, because all of the things that Alice and I have been researching, Linehan, it was like they were able to put it all on the screen. Even Alfred Kinsey, and I have a psychology minor,
mhm,
and I went to school to be a special ed teacher, but I studied Kinsey through not only the education classes, but also the psychology. And to see how that was all pedophilia being normalized, doing human experiments on babies, 4-year-olds, sex experiments on them. All of this has led, and they lined it up. I mean, they really did a great job connecting all the dots and what you're seeing in the schools today and what was happening back then. Shocking.
It's just fascinating to me. I mean, just to go back to this idea that the family unit is breaking down. I mean, to me, parenting is basically, it's like a muscle, and you have to exercise it, and you have to exercise your right to be a parent and to watch over this long period of time, the state is taking over that role so that, parents, I think, I mean, it is breaking up the family unit. This is extremely serious. I mean, this
Oh, it's
concept.
working.
Right, right. This allowing the government to take over all of this, the emotions of your child, the sex education of your child, um, teaching them about what to eat. Every aspect of their life is now being handed down, and the parents are powerless to be able to impact what their kids are being exposed to at school. It's just so frustrating to think, how can you even change this?
Yeah, and parental rights is something that I've been a part of the group, and they're really great about understanding the laws in different states, and helping parents to be able to advocate for their rights, because we do see some states have better biometric uh, uh, controls, or what am I trying to say? It's protections
Hmm.
against biometric data being collected, which is perfect for a time such as this, because we haven't really had a problem in the past. But to be able to collect, retinal and fingerprints and all these things that are even swabs that they can collect on a child. There are, these devices can detect your, the retinal engagement. Some countries are wearing those headbands, and they can tell if you're engaged, your pulse. All of that kind of biometric data can be collected on a student, and education is the most data mineable industry in the world, because when you think about all of the senses and all the things, and the development of a child and tracking them from womb to tomb,
Hmm.
it is and every lesson, every the competencies is a word that they've been trying to shift education from a classical model to this competency based or outcomes based model, which is it brings every child to the same point. It sounds good, but when you look at how you've got to move through these different competencies in order to show to demonstrate mastery, it's not the same as the classical traditional model of learning, which I'm in favor of. And that's a whole other can of worms. But there were women back in the 60s that fought that off. There were women in the 90s that fought it off. And the difference now is that we now have the technology that will make it so easy. It'll be turnkey. You don't even have to have a teacher. You really can just put a kid on the device, move them through the different competencies, and get the desired outcome that they want for the child. But are they really, are they learning in the way that our brains and our bodies were designed to learn? No, I would say no. I don't think
Right.
it's good for them.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I did an interview a while back on the concept of the trivium method, which was sort of like the classical Roman education model. I think it was used well into the 19th century before a lot of this public education and these philosophies started to manifest. But the focus on that was to teach people, critical thinking, how to think for yourself. And this is, something that I touch on this program quite a bit, is that people need to learn, that there's a huge difference between thinking for yourself and learning how to think for yourself, which is, to my mind, what education should be about, and then being indoctrinated into this path forward that's happening to our children in these institutions. And we don't even know that it's happening. It's just being imposed from above. And we don't even
Mhm.
really know, like, I mean, maybe you could go into exactly where all of this is coming from, or how, how is this just continuing to get pushed through the public education system? And even when parents try to fight back against it, they're basically powerless. And it continues to roll, it's like a unstoppable force that's rolling through education, that's indoctrinating kids into a worldview. I mean, it's social engineering at its core, right? So
Yes.
someone is social engineering us, and we're trying to stop them, and it's really challenging.
I mean, for me, I really dumb it down because it's so complicated. I really
Yeah.
just boil it down. It's just good versus evil. And so I think evil, moves through the decades. It doesn't, just picks a willing participant. And I'll say the enemy. I mean, I really do believe good versus evil, God versus Satan, and
Yeah.
that there are those who seek to control us, and there are those who believe in free will and having that sovereignty to be able to make decisions for yourself. And I think my rights come from God, and so if you don't have that eternal perspective, you're gonna be like, what do you mean your rights come from God? Well, my inalienable rights that come from God. And so it's difficult, when you're raising a child. You want those, you want those parental rights. Those are my God-given rights.
Hmm.
And you watch them being chipped away. And of course there are situations where there's abuse, but there, that, and those things should be dealt with through the law. But to infringe on my rights to decide if my child wears a mask or not, I do not believe that is the right of the school to do that. And people will use the whole, well, seatbelts, I mean, you wear a seatbelt, not, yeah, that went through the legislative process. I still don't think that they should be able to tell me I have to wear a seatbelt, but I do wear a seatbelt because it's the law. It went through the process. But masks are not, it's not the law. It's a mandate that has
Right.
been imposed on us. And then we don't even have any public debate. In my school district, we just asked for, can we just have a debate where we can present, here are the statistics on this kind of mask and this, like, no debate. So they basically, they made an arbitrary decision. They didn't even take a vote on it. They just gave the superintendent carte blanche. She has since left, and we're seeing an epidemic of superintendents leaving. I think there were 8 in the Metroplex just the last few weeks. And so you're seeing, I think, a mass exodus of these leaders because they have not been focusing on education. They know the writing's on the wall, and they're going to have to be held to account for it, and they're not doing their jobs. Their most basic job they're not doing. And at some point the school board does have to, I mean, they're supposed to be making sure they make their measurable goals year over year, and they're not. And so I don't know what's going to happen, because who wants to go into a sinking ship in a district that can't seem to make any progress, because they don't realize it's because they're focusing on everything but learning.
Right.
So of course the kids aren't learning. It's simple.
I've thought about how alienating it must be to be a teacher, because I feel like teachers, to me, in a free society, teachers would be making their own curriculums, and then parents would go, I like that curriculum, I want my child to learn from you. And that kind of relationship based on voluntary consent would be something that's fostered. But these teachers and the people that are in these institutions, these public education institutions, I mean, they also have to follow the system. They have no real freedom to decide what they teach the kids. And even when you're trying to, as a parent, and this is what just boggles my mind about the whole system. You have these parent teacher conferences, and you go and you talk to the teacher, you're concerned about what they're teaching the kids. And it's really, at the end of the day, does anybody have a choice what's going on? Like, this thing is just moving over us. The teacher kind of is in a position, and certainly if you're a principal or a superintendent, you basically have to enforce this stuff, or you're gonna get pushed out.
You won't.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they pushed out a lot of the institutional memory. The older teachers, there was kind of a move back 2010 to 2020, I would say, to get rid of the seasoned teachers, because they were skilled enough in the old way. Yeah, they would give them professional development, but you really couldn't change. They had a fixed mindset in a good way. And so they could just kind of shut their door and do it the way that they knew that the kids needed. And maybe they could kind of just go through the motions and pretend like they were doing all this new stuff, because every 2 years we would have some new fad, new curriculum, new way of, all this fuzzy math and all these tricked up ways. Because and I figured out, you can't make money on the old school math and reading. You have to trick it up. You have to rebrand it. You have to give it some, stupid name.
Right.
And so the old school ways aren't lucrative. I mean, so I pulled my youngest out of public school for fourth and fifth grade. And I figured out, so there's this little private school down the road. And I grew up with people who went there and then fed into the public junior high and high school later. And so our curriculum, it mirrored each other. We had solid language, solid math. Well, slowly over decades, it has moved away. And so think about, this private school has been teaching it the same way. They have a 50-year-old curriculum. They don't go through all the fads. They don't change. And so it's a very low tech school. And the kids, when they feed into the junior high and high school, they do very well. They move to the top of the class. So I've tried to get my district to go and see it. How are they teaching there? Or go find an old English teacher who taught in our district and ask them, show them how you're teaching it now. And then they'll tell you exactly what you're doing wrong. I mean, this is not rocket science. It's actually pretty simple. Situations are complicated, but you send them to school, you want them to learn. And children in poverty, if they're denied, okay, so say they got family issues and poverty and all these issues, and your schools have abandoned their primary role, they lose twice. Peg Luxick is an education researcher and activist, and she's been doing this for decades. And she was the one who pointed that out. And I thought, that's so true. They lose twice. I mean,
right.
It's really a tragedy, because education, we know, opens doors. I told you I worked with unemployed people, coaching them, and I could just see, you can tell if they don't know how to articulate. They can't. Some people, they couldn't even put thoughts together, to organize their thoughts, to put a resume together, because they had not been given those skills in school. So so it affects their income, their future earning potential.
Sure.
All of it.
I mean, that's what's so amazing to me. I'm thinking about so many parallels actually between what's been happening in education and what we're seeing is I would say the failure of the healthcare institution in the United States too, where we've seen doctors over the last 30, 40 years losing their independence and being assimilated into this bigger machine. And then the fascinating thing to me is that when the machine fails, it's like it always doubles down on what it's already doing.
Yeah,
it's like, well, that didn't work.
Point.
Can you change? And they won't. I mean, even with
the
lockdowns, it's like we have to lock down harder. Not enough people are wearing masks. That's why it's failing. It's like maybe it just doesn't work. Try something else.
Or just leave people the freak alone, like just let us make our own decisions for ourselves. And if it really was about health, our health leaders were never talking about health. So, in private, we're all going, okay, are you taking vitamin D and zinc? And are you doing this and this? And are you getting sunshine? Are you going out? Like all the things and which work. And then you've got them going, we need a mask and we need to socially distance. And they're saying nothing about health. Meanwhile, we find out the people who've died of COVID who were vaccinated have 4 comorbidities or, all these issues, all the stuff we knew from the beginning, because it's common sense. And they use the CARES money to spend it on propaganda and, nonsense. Meanwhile, people died because we knew from the beginning it was diabetes. Let's address diabetes because it's a way bigger threat than this virus.
Right.
And
the same thing's happening in education with they pass these education bills, and then a few people who are indoctrinating students, not interested in teaching real critical thinking. As you say, it's not rocket science. Like, let's just talk to the people who've been doing it and it's working, and figure it out. But it's not profitable for these big corporations that are publishing the textbooks and making the standardized tests. I mean, I just found out this morning, the Biden administration wants to give everybody free COVID tests. And it's like, well, wouldn't you like to be the guy that runs the COVID test company right now?
That's a good captive market of all Americans that, let's just keep testing. And the more you test, the more you're going to, it's perfect. It's like, it will never end. And that's the goal, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. So then, I think that there are people who just can't get their head around the fact that this could be a conspiracy, that people could have truly conspired to implement something like this. And we don't know for sure anything, but it sure looks like it's the perfect crisis
Yeah.
to implement. And Allison McDowell and I have been researching this stuff, and all of a sudden, she came to visit with me 2 years ago. In fact, it was MLK Day. She came to Dallas, and I remember just this sense of urgency. Like, we just felt like things were progressing in a
Right.
way that we just knew. And then weeks later, then all this hits, and I mean, it was like all the things that she has been putting out there on the impact investing and the biosecurity state and Internet of Bodies, all of that. Now we can see, oh my gosh, it's a perfect crisis. It covers everything. It's amazing. And so if you don't believe in the whole good versus evil, then you may see it like, no, there's no way that could be,
Right.
they couldn't be conspiring. But when you see how it's locked everything in place, it's abundantly clear to me that we're in this, some sort of spiritual, supernatural battle that we're
If
in.
you are listening to this, you are listening to the first free hour of The Shift with Doug McKenty. For access to the full feature-length versions of the podcast, go to www.theshiftnow.com and subscribe for the audio version for just $6 a month. Access the full-length episodes in video form through rockfin.com by subscribing at the Shift with Doug McKenty landing page. For $9.99 a month, you gain access not only to The Shift, but also all other premium content material hosted on the platform. Find out more at www.theshiftnow.com/store. Detoxify your body, decolonize your mind, make the shift. I spent way too much time arguing my own point of view. We're all on social media and we're all I kind of dove headfirst into the ivermectin argument, being like, no,
Yeah.
this really works, and here's the studies and this and that, and I'm doing all this. And after a while, I started thinking to myself, this is just my personal choice. Why do I need to justify it to the world? And it's just so fascinating to me that every single little tiny personal choice that we should all make about our own lives and how we raise our kids is become this huge political debate.
Right.
And then the biggest irony of it all.
None of your business.
Yeah, right. It's none of your business,
right.
First of all. But the biggest irony of all is that none of this debating changes anything because the system just keeps rolling on, they love it that we're arguing with each other like this because we're not stopping them,
I know it really does. It pits neighbor against neighbor, and we're so divided. And you can see it, like I was saying, with the school board meeting. You got those who are masked, those are not masked. I mean, they are begging to be. They just please mask us. Please make us wear two. Please make us wear an N95. They just want. They're just begging to be. I don't get caged, I guess. And
right.
then they're like, look at those birds out there who are flying around free. We can't have that. We need them in here in the cage.
Yeah.
This is what's best for society. It's beyond me. I was just born with some sort of, I can't be caged like that.
Yeah, I know. It seems like a few of us are kind of able to see through it. And then I don't, I always question, actually. Sometimes I feel like there might be, it's that 100th monkey idea that really there's quite a lot of people out there that are like, man, something's not right. Something doesn't make sense. And that, if we can just change that 100th monkey, then all of a sudden there can be this pretty quick shift to get people to kind of stop doing it. But it sure feels like an uphill battle right now.
It does. And after seeing that blockchain deal with the fitness clinic, that's this well-known Cooper Aerobics Center in Dallas, it's world renowned, and people come from all over. And to see them partnering with the schools on this blockchain thing and seeing how fast just with the social emotional learning, it's just sweeping the nation. Everybody's talking about it, and it's being implemented everywhere. We're talking, a global. I don't know. It's hard to know where to spend your energy because I can't be still. I can't just lay down or turn a blind eye to it. I have to do something about it. And if I didn't have hope, I wouldn't be doing, this and talking about all of it and trying to help people understand. I do have a unique role in my background, and that I have the margin to be able to spend my time on this, to help people understand, sound the alarms, wake them up, say, hey, this doesn't smell right. But it's like, is it enough? I don't know. It's not a future I want to leave my kids and grandkids in.
Yeah.
I don't accept that. So I have to do something.
Yeah.
Go down swinging.
I hear that.
Petty.
Well, we've got just a few minutes left, so it's kind of time to start to wrap it up. But I wanted to maybe finish up on this idea of having a more nuanced conversation with people. And I do think that a lot of people are really confused. A lot of what I try to talk about on this show is that the left-right paradigm doesn't really work in terms of, and because so many of us, I mean, this is what I've noticed is that people are so, they're so ingrained in their political ideology that they can't have the nuanced conversation that it really takes to like, this is what's really going on. I mean, the concept of the public-private partnership is the way that these corporate entities are creating these captive markets through government and then profiting wildly off this standardization of everything, because then they have these huge captive markets. I mean, that's just the thing about the vaccine that just blows my mind. I can't believe people can't kind of see it. I mean, do you realize they've just made a captive market of everyone in the world?
It's perfect.
Like, it's exactly.
Everyone in the world, you can just keep them coming back for more.
And they've got to get boosters, Sorry, you got to get boosters.
Yeah. Look at this. I have this on my phone. It's like, let's see, go this way. First jab, second jab, it's like booster, Omicron, Deltacron,
right?
Megatron. Like, how many are you going to do? How many are you going to say yes to? That's why I ask my friends, like some of my close friends I've grown up with. I'm like, because y'all got the vaccine, we're never going to stop getting the vaccine. Like, you should have if everybody just held firm and we're like, I'm going to wait until I do a little bit more research. Like, really, you couldn't have waited to go to that game or that concert or that trip. Like, just wait. And then everybody holds firm. And then they're like, oh shoot, we couldn't pull the wool over there. Like, they're not going to do it. But instead, everybody's like, okay, I'm just going to give me this stupid thing. Okay, I'll do the second one. And then they're kind of like, well, nobody's really asking for the third one. As long as I have that card that says I have it. Like, there's no timeline. You could have had it over. I mean, there's no order in the whole thing, which I love, because it shows that it's going to be harder for them to impose, because it's so willy-nilly and so it's disorganized. But we know that they're moving toward. I mean, they're working towards having some sort of longitudinal, like they're going to have a database that has all the vaccines in there, and eventually when we're on blockchain and we're all, then they'll be able to impose it. But for now, we need to resist and create a lot of friction and be that wrench, I guess you could say.
Yeah, there you go. I hear that. I mean, that's like I keep hoping that, okay, here's the Omicron variant, and now people really are like, do I have to get a third booster? Am I going to have to get a fourth booster? Like, it's going to become more and more difficult. But you and I know that coming down the pipeline are these vax passports, and we know that the vax passports aren't just about vaccines. They're about all of your financial data and all of your education data as well. And so, they're going to keep it going somehow. There's going to be another variant until they implement, this whole smart grid system that we're all going to be a part of. So difficult to stand up to. Any advice to people, in terms of your social activism? Like, how do you stand up and fight it? I mean, what are some places to go?
I think that I think it's really good I really try and connect with people. I'm on the phone all day long trying to just talk to people, or meeting with them, or sharing, clips and information. And that's all I do, is just try and educate people, give them facts and links and data and all the things that they need proof of, what's happening, and show them so that they just empower people to. It's not really about I mean, yes, I would like to see, a tidal wave of parents waking up. But for me, it's like the one-to-one connections, the human connections, the engaging people, helping people, just, you see people suffering, reach out to them, help them. And if we are all doing that, we don't need nonprofits if we're all stepping up and helping people, to take the responsibility to do it. And then I think just pay attention to what your kids are learning. Love your kids, talk to your kids, connect with your kids. Because if you don't, somebody else is going to, and they're probably not going to have their best interests at heart. And don't be afraid. Like, I think it's really important. People need to just shed the whole, like, worrying about what people think, because, that's so, it's so corrosive to the spirit. I think it just makes you, you're just never going to do the right thing if you're always worried about what people think. And so having that courage to say, you got to tell the truth. You just got to keep pressing. I mean, we're being honest here. Like, is this what we want? And having the courage to call it out. Right. And you have to name names too, because if you're just kind of dancing around the edges, you have to name names and talk about who's doing what and why that's not acceptable. And people don't like public shaming. Never go personal. But do call out the bad deals and the bad behavior.
Right. What do you think about the kind of there has been a bit of a homeschool revolution here in the last couple of years? I mean, people really are getting sick of it. And I think the homeschool numbers are getting like close to 10%. The African American community has been leading the way. Actually, they're seem to be really.
I know. In fact, my friend in the other room, she's a Black mom, 5 kids, and she's like, "Nope, I am not doing my 5th child. I am not putting her in that system. No way." She pulled her out, and it's huge, and I think it's great. It wasn't for me, but I didn't have the confidence to think that I could do it. Now I understand I could do it, and I should do it. I should have done it. But, that was a different time. Now I realize I'm probably going to have to help homeschool my grandkids. I would not encourage putting our kids in the system as it stands today until it gets fixed and cleaned up, which I have hope that we could, but maybe we won't. Maybe we just burn the system down and start over. I don't know. I think if everybody pulls their kids out, then they're not going to have the money to. They get money per butts in the seats, and pull the kids out. That speaks volumes to them. Money talks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I actually, I'd love to see, communities really organizing around this, because the more people that are homeschooling, then the more people can pitch in and the easier it becomes. And I think that parents will find that, with a little bit of community support, it doesn't have to be very expensive and super time consuming.
No. Books, paper, pencils, good teachers. It's really simple.
And quality time with the kids, instead of all this standardization and alienation that's been going on.
Agreed.
Well, great, Lynn. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate the work that you've done and that you're doing. This education, I mean, it's actually, to me, it's clutch, right? I mean, this is where we all learn about our worlds, and the more people that are getting the worldview from within the system, the harder and harder it's going to be for people to learn how to think outside the box, and they're going to be indoctrinated into it. And all of this abusive behavior that we've been talking about is just going to be normalized. It already is so normalized. So thanks for standing up against it.
Well, thank you for having me, and thanks for what you do. And I love that Alana Freeland. Is her name? I loved that. That interview was
great
phenomenal.
Episode. Thanks. Yeah. You want to let people know, where they can find out more about your stuff and your podcast and all that?
Yeah, the podcast is Social Impact with Lynn Davenport. It's on the Offbeat Business Network. And so you can find it on Rumble and all the major, like Spotify and all that. But I'm on Twitter, Lynn S. Davenport. And I'm an aggressive tweeter. I love Twitter. It's great. Even though it censors it, I usually get around it.
I know, it's funny. I connected with you on Twitter, and I was thinking about it today. I was like, I don't think I've seen one of her tweets yet. I don't.
What's going on with that?
What is going on with that? I know.
Right.
Likewise, right?
Spell blockchain with a Y. I have to do all these stupid things.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, fine. You're just making me think more. Yeah.
Well, right on. I'll let people know you've been listening to The Shift, and I'm your host, Doug McKenty, and you can find all the episodes of The Shift. Best place to go is www.theshiftnow.com, where everything is there in one place. My video stuff is, most of it's still getting up on YouTube, but if you want to see it all, you'll have to go to Rockfin or Odyssey. And all of my, I put audio versions up on SoundCloud, so you can find it there. And I am at D McKenty on Twitter, and you can just look me up on Facebook, Doug McKenty. Or I also have a Shift with Doug McKenty page that I post to as well. So you can keep track of the shift there. And thanks again, Lynn, for coming on. Again, thanks for your work, and love to keep track as you continue on down this road. And hopefully we'll see some real positive changes as a result here in the next couple of years.
Okay. All right. Well, good. Thanks so much.
Yeah, you bet. Have a great day.
You too.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, my interview with education activist Lynn Strawn, Davenport, host of the Social Impact Podcast. I was happy to have her on. She's a great complement to the interviews I've done in the past. I was fortunate enough to speak with John Taylor Gatto before he passed away, did a more recent interview with David Rodriguez on this subject. And it just, to me, is actually probably the number one most important issue really in the country that we should all be talking about all of the time, which is trying to decentralize what all of our kids learn. We create our worldview. If everybody learns the same thing and a centralized organization is able to teach everyone the same thing, then we all get a similar worldview, similar ideas of government. How can we grow up and live in a healthy democracy when everyone has been educated according to the same curriculum? I just find this to be actually quite outrageous. I think if people took a step back and thought about it, I mean, do we really have a democracy when we have such a centralized form of education and everybody gets essentially indoctrinated into the same way of thinking about politics and the same set of family values, the same set of values, the same systems of morality and thinking? And I mean, constructing an entire worldview, thoughts about how we live and what should be important and what is virtuous. I mean, education is so core to what it means to be an individual and have a self-identity that this is just a super important topic. So I was happy to have Lynn on to really kind of dive deep. She, like a lot of people, have been really frustrated about the fact that over time, more and more emphasis has been placed on these standardized tests, and this has been an issue for such a long time. And I completely understand parents' frustrations when they show up to the school boards and they say, hey, we don't really like what our kids are learning. We'd like to see the system take a little bit of a different track. I mean, ultimately, frankly, I actually believe in unschooling or homeschooling collectives or any kind of options, because the system prevents itself from evolving. When parents show up and they say, hey, even ideally, we live in a democracy, we should be able to vote people in to these school boards that can then reflect through the curriculum what our kids are learning in school, and it's just not that way. People get on these school boards and they're pushing paper for the system, and they're forced to teach to these standardized tests, which, like I said in the introduction, this is the opposite of teaching critical thinking. Lynn goes into this in our interview. I mean, classical education didn't just teach facts, but it taught how to think about the facts, how to think about yourself, how to individuate yourself, and how to come to your own conclusions about things and be a strong, individuated human being. The system right now is doing the opposite of that. It's feeding people a curriculum based to the test, and then we're basically building little robots here, right, who go out into society all thinking the same, all feeling the same about what's going on. And Lynn, of course, with the social emotional learning thing that's coming on, with the blockchain tech, with the emotional nudging that's going to be going on in the future, they're just going to start collecting mountains of data on every individual kid, on your kid. They're going to know everything about them to the point where they're going to be able to manipulate them on an emotional, psychological level to a minute degree, and then nudge them into these directions. I mean, this is brainwashing. This is like next level brainwashing technology, right? So really appreciate the fact that Lynn's activism is on top of this and trying to educate people like, hey, wait a minute. Maybe this isn't the best way to move forward when you think about education. And we talk about just the frustration of parents not being able to have this influence on how their kids learn, what their kids learn, the worldview that they're creating. And ultimately, we're talking about, a breakdown of the family unit. This is what parents do. This is what they've done since the beginning of time, is raise their children inside their worldview. And then over generations, you're developing like a strong individuated family unit. Without that responsibility, right? Then over time, parents, why bother? I'm too busy working for the corporation to have time to dedicate to my family's worldview, my family's belief system. And over time, the parents and the kids just become more and more worker bees for the corporate government system, unable to think outside the box, unable to build strong and healthy individuated children, individuals, and family units, families in general. And of course, that's going to extend to the general community. There's a pretty strong argument that this has been going on now for over 100 years, and we're all pretty much in a bad way about this right now. It's so central to the issue to liberate the next generation from this kind of education, and to allow parents to really directly be able to make the decisions about how their children think and feel about the world around them. And like Lynn points out, this is with the social emotional learning and the new blockchain technologies, it's going to be next level stuff unless we stand up and we put a stop to it and we start to localize these decisions on a community level where we can really make a difference. So really just want to thank Lynn once again for her work, and thank her for coming on the show. If you're interested in finding out more about her work, I think Twitter is probably the best place to go. The name of the podcast is the Social Impact Podcast, so you can Google that. I should say you should look that up on your preferred search engine. And her Twitter handle is at lynnsdavenport.com, and I'll have that in the show notes. So thanks everybody for listening. Really appreciate it. You can find out more about The Shift at www.theshiftnow.com. I'm about to wrap up the Psychology of Lockdown series, so we'll be putting that out. I'll have full playlists with so you can listen to all of them in a row. I think that's coming out pretty solid. I keep saying to myself, man, I've been talking about the mass formation psychosis for over a year now. So glad everybody's picking up on that one. Wish it translated into more hits onto my site, but so be it. At least people are thinking about it. And next week I'm going to be speaking with filmmaker Marcy Cravat, who just released a film with Dr. Andrew Kaufman called Terrain. So we're getting back into the terrain germ theory conversation, and I'm looking forward to that. I worked with Marcy back in the day for a little bit on the roundtable discussions, and I'll be looking forward to talking to her again. Also, I wanted to tell you guys I have started a new blog. It's on Substack called The Populist Papers. I'll be writing an essay about why I called it The Populist Papers, because I know it's such a controversial word, but I think it's already started out being just a little bit controversial, so we'll keep that trend going. And then, of course, you can find me at Doug McKenty on Facebook, at D McKenty on Twitter. The podcast is up on iTunes and all the big podcast hosting sites. And also, I'm recommending Rockfin for people to go, $10 a month, and you can get the feature-length versions there. And think about hitting the website, www.theshiftnow.com, where you can sign up for the newsletter or subscribe there for $6 a month for the feature-length versions as well. So thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you again next week. Take care.